Good afternoon. Welcome once again to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. It's good to have you with us on another Wednesday afternoon. I'm Matt Barnes, morning co-anchor of NBC4 today and a member of the CMC Board of Trustees. And CMC's political series is sponsored by Hannah News Service. Today's forum partners are NBC4 and King Business Interiors. Our live stream presented by the Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation, the Columbus Dispatch, and NBC4i.com. Let's thank all of those for supporting today's forum. It is an honor to welcome one of the two candidates running for Ohio governor this afternoon. Our speaker will face her opponent in the general election on Tuesday, November 8th. Please note that the Republican candidate for Governor Mike DeWine was invited to join us for today's forum. Audience questions for today's forum must be submitted in writing, and you'll see those there on your tables, on the cards with the pins right there. Please print your question and your name on the card. A member of the CMC Program Committee will collect those cards at a certain time, and we'll ask that question for you on your behalf. We are excited, though, for a great conversation about the future of the Buckeye State. So please welcome Dan Whaley, former mayor of Dayton and Democratic candidate for Ohio governor, and our host, Colleen Marshall, anchor with NBC4, my personal hero. You can learn more about today's speakers at our forum flyer. Colleen, and we look forward to today's conversations. Floor is yours.
Before I begin, I don't normally do this at these events, but I do want to make a very brief statement. I've had a lot of discussions with our news director about the so-called open chair debate. And you'll notice I'm not going to be asking questions today to any open chairs. But I believe in, and certainly at NBC4, we support open political discussion and debate that goes beyond the messages that are canned and prepared that you see in political ads. Debates and conversations like those we have here at the Metropolitan Club. All candidates for office, regardless of their party, have an obligation to answer unscripted questions about their agenda, their beliefs, and their record. And when one candidate refuses to debate or to answer unscripted questions, we cannot allow that refusal to stop the conversation. And so I know the debate commission had struggles with this about whether to have debates or discussions with one candidate. It's one of the reasons that we believe we have to move forward with the conversation and not allow anyone to stop the narrative. And so we welcome Nan Whaley, and I'm going to begin with a question about what is the number one issue right now for Ohio voters in any poll that you look at, and that's the economy. The reality is state lawmakers have very limited control over inflation, interest rates. What do you think as a state leader you could or would want to do to help families that are struggling with the current economic situation?
Well, Colleen, thank you, and thank you for your commitment to the democratic process. It's important to have journalists that are open and continue to push on it. That's a key part to it, too. So I appreciate that and holding all people accountable that want to run for office. That's important. The issue around the economy is something that we've talked quite a lot about in this campaign. And we see actually a lot of things the governor could do. And we've made some recommendations. For example, we've called to do an inflation rebate with the $2.6 billion coming down from the federal government, a $350 inflation rebate to every working family in the state, about 89% of Ohioans, to really help with the squeeze on gas and groceries. This isn't a liberal idea. This is an idea that Florida and Indiana have done to make sure the folks that are really feeling the pinch around these rising costs have some help. We've also called to, the first thing we would do on the issue of the economy is to put an executive order out that stops price gouging. We're one of the few handful of states in the country where it's still legal for corporations to gouge consumers with no repercussions in this state. We see those costs rise, particularly around prescription drugs, utility costs, and others, with nothing that the government can do because that executive order is not in place. We know, too, that we can cap insulin rates at $30 a month in the state, something the state of Kentucky has even done. So there is actual regular actions. I think we've unveiled about 5 of them through the campaign's time to make sure that we can really help on the pinch of inflation. The last thing we've done is saying, like, look, we need to suspend the gas tax for 6 months while it gets under control. We can backfill that with the rainy day fund, so the infrastructure is still built in the state, which is very important, but give people relief now while we try to get the national, as you're making the point, gets the inflation rates under control. The state can do that work. They can provide on-the-ground help. This governor can do that. This governor's not interested in doing that because that doesn't help him with the self-dealings and the cronyism that we see at the State House. Keep in mind, this is the State House that the FBI has called as the most corrupt in the country. And so they're not interested in really directing help to working families in Ohio.
Well, of course, those accusations stemmed from the First Energy scandal, when we know that the former House Speaker is still facing federal charges coming out of that. But First Energy is a reality right now in the state. The bailout went through. Voters are paying for it.
Right.
So
not only voters, everyone that gets a utility bill, right?
Right.
So everybody's paying for it.
Everybody's paying for it in Ohio. So in so many ways, it's a done deal. What would you do to address the fallout from First Energy?
Well, look, we've called on firing all the PUCO commissioners. That needs to happen. We clearly have a system that is bought and sold by the utilities rather than, and being regulating themselves rather than having folks from the Consumer Council or having folks from renewable energy on the PUCO, and making sure that we have more representative effort on that council. It's very important on the regulation of utility companies. And right now you have the fox guarding the hen house there. But I want to back up a bit around corruption in the State House. We have seen this for a long time in the state, and we've just dealt with it and said, oh well, and it does not have to be this way. You know, if we were sitting here 4 years ago, the big discussion were the electronic classrooms of tomorrow, or ECOT, where they had a big donor who had an idea of virtual classrooms. They let him do this, and he sucked money out of our public school systems. 6 years ago, it was the payday lenders who wanted to charge, and they let them, exorbitant interest rates that drove foreclosures in communities and neighborhoods that I live in, and affected, again, families and communities. Over and over again at that State House, you see a big donor with a terrible idea where Ohioans pay. The first thing I did when I got in this race, way back in April of 21, the first policy action was June of 21, and it was about how we take the corruption out of the State House and this anti-corruption plan. And so we need to back it up. Again, we got to deal with the fallout from First Energy, but we've got to make sure that we are, have a public accountability commission so we know what the Inspector General and the Ohio Ethics Commission are actually looking at. Having that be appointed not just by the governor, but by other State House leaders so it can be open and transparent. We need to make sure that we had to stop the revolving door. In the case of First Energy, they got, DeWine, they bankrolled DeWine's campaign, and then he gave them everything they wanted, including this bailout, but also their top lobbyist was the top utility regulator on PUCO. So we've got to stop the revolving door of working for government or corporations. You can work for one or the other. You should not work for both. And let me make the point, when First Energy settled with the U.S. government for the largest settlement in American history, they admitted that they bribed Sam Randazzo with $4 million. That is the kind of stuff that's going on at the State House over and over again. And the answer for them is that they don't think Ohioans care and that they can do whatever they want. There is a clear choice this November on a way to move forward where we have accountability and we have new leadership there, but we need a complete and total overhaul there.
You mentioned having a new commission for oversight. We've already got an attorney general and an inspector general and an ethics commission. Is the answer really to make another layer, another agency, another government arm? Isn't it to make what we have more effective?
Well, I think what you see on the inspector general and ethics commission, there's no sunlight there. And so I always believe transparency is one of the best ways to move forward. You have transparency with the Public Accountability Commission that isn't just appointed by the Attorney General or just one group, but a group of different elected officials. And having not just one party, rule the state is key too. So then that we can see that sunlight and transparency. Secondly, we need to make sure we're fully funding the Ohio Ethics Commission and Inspector General. They've been flat for the past decade on their funding source, and we're not talking about a lot of money here, but their increase on the number of referrals they've gotten has increased 25%. So when you see that a quarter of an increase in referrals, you can't get them to them all. And so making sure they're fully funded so they can fully go through what is happening at the State House and in our state government, I think is really key too.
But to go back to my original question, the bailout exists. And if we remove from the process the alleged corruption and what we've seen from the First Energy, their consent decree with the federal government, if we remove all of that and go back to, if we could go back in time and take a look at the nuclear bailout and the argument that they were saving jobs and keeping those energy plants going, was that worth saving? Were the plants worth saving?
Well, look, I think what you saw there is the House Bill 6 became a thing where it was about saving First Energy, not really around the nuclear piece. I mean, it's still not fully repealed, to your point, and we're still paying for an energy plant in Indiana. So to really have that conversation where it wasn't just about one company, but what's really best for the energy providing for the state of Ohio, in House Bill 6, they also rolled back all renewable standards, right? So here we know where the future of energy is going. It's going to renewable, and Ohio has decided not to invest in that at all because that's not who is the self-dealing from the State House and the governor's happening in. It doesn't have anything to do with good paying jobs. If we were really serious about where the future is going to be and where we invest in the 21st century, we would definitely be investing in renewable just like we're investing in all other energy sources. That's the conversation, and the bill that needs to go through is what is really going to create the most jobs in the next 10 to 20 years that will also make sure that our utilities are affordable and that they're reliable, which is another issue for this. That was completely lost in House Bill 6. We'd have to start all over about what really needs to happen with our utilities.
As you talk about legislation that needs to pass, if you were to be elected, the reality is the current makeup of the State House is at many times, in many instances, especially during the COVID crisis, we saw to the right of Mike DeWine. They didn't think he was moving right enough. So how could a Democrat move into the governor's office and get anything effectively accomplished with the current makeup of the State House?
Well, first, I would say that Mike DeWine is too weak to stand up to this legislature. We've seen a Republican governor before him, John Kasich, who was clearly in charge. Right now, Mike DeWine has completely abdicated what is the fifth most powerful governor position in the country to Senate President Matt Huffman. And that's because he's more interested in holding on to his power rather than to really show real leadership. So that's the first point. He was more worried about his primary, more worried about how he stays into power rather than doing the right thing. Secondly, what we see on this General Assembly, it's an illegitimate State House. You have these lines that have been drawn and have been called unconstitutional by a bipartisan Ohio Supreme Court, not once, not twice, but 7 times. So when you talk at the beginning of this about the disrespect to the democratic process, we've seen this before when you have a governor and a state legislature completely ignore 73% of the Ohio public on wanting fair districts and deciding to do whatever they want, even if the Supreme Court has told them it's unconstitutional. Now, we will redraw these lines come this next year, regardless of who the governor is. And the governor sits on the Redistricting Commission. So this race is important not just for the economic issues, but for the future of democracy in the state. Are we going to have a governor that's just going to do whatever his party wants him to do, even though he says what's politically convenient at the time and does whatever they want at the end? Or are we going to have what the Ohio people have called for, which are fair districts? And look, I don't think they're going to be Democrats when that's done. I think it will still be a majority Republican, but they will be people that are worried about general elections rather than primary elections. And that will normalize our State House, and we'll have a State House that's actually reflective of the Ohio public. Because this public is a common sense, middle of the road state. We are being governed by extremists and radicals, all because they don't want to take power away, and they like the fact that they make their decisions in primary elections.
Let's talk about abortion. There are many people who believe that that could be like the hidden factor in the race this year. I think Ohio, if this is true, I've heard it. I can't say it's true, but I've heard that Ohio is only behind Kansas in the number of women who have registered to vote this year leading up to the election, because a lot of women are worried about the outcome of abortion standards that are now back to the state. Even before you were running for governor, you were clear and open about your position of being pro-choice and having the government out of the abortion decision-making, that's between a woman and her doctor. But while we know from polls that most Ohioans favor abortion with restrictions, you've been on the record favoring very few restrictions. So maybe you are to the far left of what Ohioans want on abortion. What do you want to see in Ohio when it comes to abortion access?
I've been on the record very clearly that I want the same rights we had on June 23rd, which was Roe versus Wade. And I've been very clear, too, that the first thing we would do once we're elected is work to put Roe in the Ohio Constitution so it will be codified and no extremists can take away a right that we had, that my mother fought for, that my niece doesn't have. This is the position of the majority of Ohioans. Over 60% of Ohioans want Roe versus Wade. And let me be clear for folks that don't understand the abortion discussion. Roe has limits. Those were the limits around viability that were the law of the land my entire life until this summer. That's what Ohio women deserve. That's what we would fight for, and that's what the majority of Ohioans believe.
And the polls show that the majority of Ohioans would favor a return to that level of restrictions.
Every poll is always like 60 to 65% on this.
So why do you think the polls show you so far behind Mike DeWine?
Well, I don't know
if this is an issue that's important to Ohio voters, why do most polls have him, double digits ahead of you in this race?
Well, I don't know if you've heard, but he's been on the ballot since I was 10 months old, and so he has a lot of name recognition. The guy's been in office for 46 years. And so I think that has a lot to do with it. And look, I think, this has been a shock to our system and to women and the men who support women in our state. Particularly, look, when June 24th happened, it was tough for all American women, but for Ohio women, it was devastating. We saw what Mike DeWine did 7 hours after Roe fell. He made sure the 6-week abortion ban went in place. And we saw what that meant in this city. A 10-year-old in Columbus who was raped had to go to Indiana to terminate a pregnancy. When Mike DeWine was asked about it, he said he doubted if she existed, and if she existed, she was lying. Now, once Columbus police arrested her rapist and he confessed, Mike DeWine has 2 words, and you know what they are, Colleen. They're no comment, because he doesn't want to talk to the Ohio voters and the Ohio people because his position is so out of step. He thinks it's fine and believes a 10-year-old girl should carry a rapist baby to term, which is incredibly dangerous for the 10-year-old, incredibly wrong, and should be the decision between her and her family. Mike DeWine wants in that room. That's why he's not talking to you or anyone else, because he knows his positions are so out of step. Also, we know the polls have been all over the map in this race and across the country. If you remember when Kansas happened, on the vote around abortion access, it was too close to call. Kansas won by 18 points. They were 18 points off. In August, we saw the same thing on a New York special, where he was down 8. The Democratic Congressional Campaign did not even invest in the race. He won by 2. The polls have consistently not shown how big of an issue abortion is for voters in races, because this has never happened before in my lifetime. Never before have a group of people, which is half the population, lost a right. A fundamental right has been taken away. And we have a governor who has been waiting his entire long career to make that happen. That's what's on the ballot this November. We are dogged about it, and we see across the state women who have had enough, who aren't going to put up with it for them or their daughters. And it's going to make the difference in this race.
Do you think the Democratic Party should be doing more to support you and to get that message out and to maybe make that more of a relevant factor for when people go into the polls in 20 days?
Well, look, it is the only thing, if you see our paid media, it is the only thing we're really talking about. We think it is the issue. We think it is that this state is at a fundamental point. Not only is it a freedom issue, which is super important, but it's an economic issue for this state. We've done roundtables all across the state with medical students, and they're making their decisions not to practice here. Because number one, they're disappointed they came to Ohio to go to school or stay in Ohio to go to school because they can't get all of the training, because it's now illegal in Ohio, that they need to become a full doctor, particularly if you're an OBGYN around these issues. And secondly, they're like, why would I stay in a place where I have to call a lawyer before I practice medicine every single time? We already have a shortage of doctors. This will get worse. And if you're 20 to 40 years old and as a woman, and you want, regardless if you want to grow your family or not, would you stay in Ohio when the government is going to go further? Because he is going to go further on this issue. He has said, the governor has said he wants to go, I'm going to quote him, as far as possible on this issue. And in Ohio, with this illegitimate state house, you don't even have to imagine it. They have a bill they've already had hearings on that bans abortion at conception, bans birth control like IUD, and bans in vitro fertilization. This is completely out of step with what common sense Ohioans call for. And I think Ohioans know that they're a common sense state that want women to have these decisions with their family and their doctors.
To go back to part of my question, are you getting the support you need and want from the party, from your Democratic Party leaders?
Well, yeah, I think the state party's been very supportive of us. We have the largest coordinated campaign in the country, actually, between us and with us and Tim Ryan in the state. But look, you always want more support if you're running for office. That's always the goal of it. But I've been really grateful for the support we've gotten.
Who is giving you financial support? Who are the donors that voters might want to know about?
Look, we are really
proud
of we're really proud of the donations we've gotten. We've received donations from over 27,000 people, 10 times the number of donors that Mike DeWine has. And ours are grassroots folks that are committed to this race. And it's women from across the state doing meet and greets, doing efforts to really push because they know what's at stake. So it is a broad coalition, and I'm really proud of the support we've gotten through this grassroots campaign.
Here in Central Ohio, Mike DeWine can point and is pointing with pride to some major projects that are coming to the region, especially Intel. Intel is promising jobs, infrastructure improvements, jobs that are high paying. Now we know Honda is going to expand its electronic vehicle capacity here, and they've got a partner, and they're going to have an electric battery plant in Central Ohio that's promising a lot of jobs. Is he doing what he promised to do for the people of Ohio when he has these massive jobs projects that he can say, look what we did?
Well, I think anybody in Ohio is excited about Intel and Honda coming here. The challenge I think the government has to do is has to be transparent about what we're getting in return for the largest investment in Ohio's history. The state of Ohio, and that means Ohio taxpayers, have put $2 billion into the Intel investment, and we still don't know what the agreement is. And so if Intel doesn't come to do what they agreed on, we would never know because there's no transparency right now is what we see in these economic development deals. Look, when you're a mayor, you do this quite often. You have agreements and tax incentives, but it is very public, and there are very direct callbacks for the local community should the deal not come all the way into fruition. And we have seen already how this Intel deal has been on again, not as big, okay, we're gonna be big, just based on things that are out of our control, like the federal government. So really having an understanding of what Ohioans are getting in return for these deals, I think is really important, especially when we have the record of this governor in this state house being called the most corrupt by the FBI in the country. The lack of transparency around these deals is very concerning. Secondly, I'll say we are in the Columbus Metropolitan Club. It's in Columbus. This is the only metro that's growing, and these jobs continue only to come to this metro. And so I'll say when Intel was announced, I think a leader from nearly every single region texted me and said, "Where's our Intel?" And we have seen from Columbus and the growth of Columbus, it hasn't actually been from other states. It's from other communities in Ohio. And that is not a sustainable way for us to grow as a state. Compare that to Nashville, for example, where they actually are pulling talent from other states. Columbus Metro is only pulling 9 out of 10 are from people from other communities in Ohio. And that's a concern. So we have to get this investment, not just in this metro.
So what's your plan? What would you do to make sure that we not only retain, which we always hear, we have college educated people, especially in engineering and the STEM fields that leave Ohio. So what's your plan for retaining Ohioans, but also attracting outside investments and people?
Right, well, I'm really proud. Last month, we did what we call our One Good Job Plan. The state of Ohio says, and this is the state of Ohio number, says that we will have about 22,000 job openings in this state, particularly around building Ohio for roads, bridges, infrastructure, building buildings. 22,000 openings. That was before the Intel deal was announced and before the bipartisan infrastructure bill was planned. This government has said, well, we'll just bring people in from other states. When they do that, they go home every weekend and take that money with them. The One Good Job Plan we talk about, we would put in place is a $65 million investment in apprenticeship readiness programs to widen that pipeline so people from Ohio build Ohio. So people from Chillicothe are building Chillicothe. We have got to build this economy from the middle out, not from the top down. And those jobs are good paying jobs with pensions and benefits that are all across the state. We know it's going to be more than 22,000, because of the Intel and bipartisan infrastructure plan. We should be making sure and preparing that we have Ohioans that are building Ohio. That work can be all across the state, particularly because of the bipartisan infrastructure work, and we need to make sure that we're building that talent here for us now. That makes a big difference. As someone, my dad was an iron worker who was an auto worker. Those jobs are the jobs that got me to be the first to graduate college in my family. They make a difference. We know that's how the middle class was built in this state, in this country, and we need to make sure that we're investing in that in a very real way. This government is not doing that.
I want to give you a chance to respond to some of the things that voters see every day in commercials that are attack ads against you. And we're all used to attack ads, and it's like, well, what do we believe? What do we not believe? Among the things that are being said about you is that you were a failed mayor.
My mother takes great offense to that one.
I bet. That you raised taxes even on seniors in your district, that crime was up, that you defunded the police. So one by one, this is your opportunity to talk to not just voters in this room, but we have a lot of people on the live stream today. So respond to the accusations that we hear day in and day out.
Well, I'm glad that people are cynical about 30-second commercials that have, really fast-moving pictures and say, this is what's happening. I think Ohioans have gotten smarter.
And they always make the opponent look so unflattering.
I know.
Bad light, and
I know,
they
right?
slow their face down. I'm thinking,
Right.
man, I don't ever want anybody to do an attack ad on me.
Yeah,
It's not pretty.
It comes with the territory some, right? So look, I'm proud of my time as mayor. I was president of the United States Conference of Mayors, and we saw over $1 billion of investment in our city without a partner at the State House, I might add. So we're really proud of that work. We had, in 2016, I talk about it a lot, a high-quality universal preschool for every single 4-year-old. It was so popular and did so well that we added every 3-year-old as well. It's become a national best practice. Fancy cities like Santa Barbara come to Dayton to figure out preschool. It's something I'm really proud of the work we're doing to get kids kindergarten ready and also make sure that people have access to childcare, which is a key workforce issue, something that should be scaled statewide. Dayton voters voted for that. They voted for this. I supported it so we could have investment in preschool, but it was a vote by the people of Dayton. That's what they're discussing there. Secondly, I'm proud that we actually, during my time as mayor, increased the number of police officers that are at the city of Dayton. We know we need more police officers. Every mayor that I talk to, particularly every mayor in the state of Ohio knows this. Is why we fought for the American Rescue Plan money, because we wanted to make sure that we could have police and fire services. That's why I fought for that, which, by the way, Mike DeWine attacks me on an ad and is more than happy to do, I think, 15 press conferences where you don't get to ask questions, of course, but he gets to make the point that he is putting this money into the community, money that we fought for to make happen to protect police and fire. So that is absolutely not true. In 2009, do you remember 2009, the Great Recession that hit Dayton probably hardest, second only to Detroit?
Yeah, I'm old enough to remember 2009.
Yeah. Thanks, Colleen.
I'm pretty sure I welcome 1809. I think I remember at this point.
Well, 2009 was a really tough year for Dayton. I mean, I remember it being, we lost NCR, Delphi, all the Delphi declared bankruptcy, and General Motors left town, right, when they did the bankruptcy of General Motors. That all happened in Dayton in around 90 days. Dayton probably had the worst Great Recession next to Detroit. Just for our manufacturing, we lost 16% of our job base. 62,000 jobs, it was enormous. And we did across-the-board cuts in the city, so that way we could not go bankrupt during the Great Recession. That's what they're talking about when we had to do across-the-board cuts in our city. Look, you've got to govern as a mayor, and you've got to make sure that people have the services they need. I am proud of the work that I did as mayor. We saw an increase in the number of officers. We've seen an increase in the number of in our ability, frankly, to fight crime. We've actually seen violent crime go down in Dayton during my time. We just did a roundtable with the former police chief, Richard Beal, who served 13 years with mayor, to talk about the statistics. So this is just all not true, or moved to a way to, lawyer lie through commercials. I know we're all shocked.
I do want to remind people that we take questions from the audience if you've got them. They're writing them this time, and we also have them, some people putting in questions online. You got to write them down on your card and get them. Someone will be around to your table. I want to, before we move to audience questions, we can't move on without talking about the tragedy that you guided Dayton through. The mass shooting, and at that time there were promises that gun control would be coming. The reality is, it doesn't matter who's in the governor's office. This is not a legislature that's going to put restrictions on guns. That's the truth. And since that time, gun rights have actually expanded. You don't need training now for concealed carry, and you can do open carry in more places. So realistically, what would we expect during a Whaley administration? What could you realistically accomplish when it comes to guns, especially an issue that has to be very personal for you?
It is personal to me, and frankly, I believed Mike DeWine when he called me the day after we had the vigil. I'm sure you remember it was August of 2019. Thousands of Daytonians came to a vigil Mike DeWine came to. And when he got up on the stage to speak, you don't see this very much in American politics. The people of Dayton shouted in frustration, "Do something," so loudly the governor could not finish his comments and he had to sit down. And he called me the next day and said he intended to do something around gun safety. Look, I'm a mayor. I work across party lines all the time. And if someone's going to make your community more safe, you're going to work with them. So I stood next to him when he unveiled Strong Ohio. And then I watched him do nothing to really move it forward. And then I watched him do something all right. He made the problem worse, right? He signed Stand Your Ground, like you mentioned, permitless concealed carry, and the arming of teachers with little training. I would like to point out that permitless concealed carry was not veto-proof. He could have vetoed any of these things. There were still enough Republicans that said no to this bill because law enforcement were against it, that he could have stopped it, and he chose not to. Again, saying what's politically convenient at the time and doing whatever the extremist wants when it matters. This state, further, it's another example where we're being governed by extremists. 9 out of 10 Ohioans support universal background checks. I like to joke that 9 out of 10 Ohioans don't agree the Ohio State Buckeyes are the best football team, right? This is a universal Ohio opinion. And this goes back to redistricting. Because again, if we get legislators that have to think about their general election voters rather than their primary election voters, we would get common sense gun safety. So this wouldn't be something in the first 2 years, you're right. I recognize once elected, I'm gonna stop bad things from happening to this state. That's gonna be the role of the governor, and that's an important job. But the second 2 years, we can get common sense gun safety because the majority of Ohioans are really, really there. And those are the kind of things that we're excited to work on because we know this is a common sense state that wants to be governed in a common sense way. It has gotten completely out of whack.
All right, we are going to go now. Jane Scott, the CEO of the Metropolitan Club, is going to tell us about what some voters want to know. Jane?
So we have questions online that have been submitted before, and I'm getting them live, and we'll go back and forth between questions that have been submitted. So we'll go as quickly as we can. We have lots and lots of questions. We'll try to combine some thoughts as well. So the first question, what are your thoughts about ranked choice voting?
Yeah, look, I think ranked choice voting has shown a way to shake out a lot of the partisanship overall in our governments. And folks that have used ranked choice, we've seen, again, a normalization of the democracy. So yeah, I think it's overall a good idea. There's a lot of work that would need to be done in this state to start that. We haven't even seen, I don't think, a community has done that yet. And I think we would start with having a local community start with ranked choice to see how that goes and how people get comfortable with it as we move forward. But it has been a way that we've seen democracy be protected in this country.
Carol Looper, a board member, has the next question.
What support is most needed for your campaign between now and November, aside from money?
Oh, okay. Well, money's important, As a working class woman from Dayton, I'm not a millionaire. And so Mike DeWine is wealthy enough to put $4 million of his own money in this race. I'm a public servant. My husband's a public servant. That's not happening. But secondly, go to nanwhaley.com. There are volunteer opportunities that you can definitely join. But I always like to say what I really think is the big way that people can help on this campaign is if they can think of people that they don't talk politics to that they're friends with. And this might be people that are in your book club or in your church or in your bridge club. My husband plays bridge. He's not 80, but he does play bridge. And really talking to folks that you don't talk politics to because you just don't want to go there. And particularly for women that want to help, talking to other women around what's at stake around abortion access for their daughters, their granddaughters, their nieces. And having that conversation about Mike DeWine and what he's done, particularly around gun safety and abortion, I think is really key. And I tell folks, you don't need to go talk to the Trump flag people, but there are people that are open and are not happy with how their community is moving forward. And we have got to break the discourse and the dialogue so we don't just get in our bubbles and have conversations with people we know we're going to agree with.
My son is 36 and he plays euchre. So,
oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like, really? Okay, Jane.
This question is from Lee Shackelford. Is it more important to lower taxes or spend tax dollars for the betterment of more Ohioans?
Look, I think I'm gonna answer that a little differently. I would say that it's important that we spend our taxpayers wisely, but we also need to make sure that people are paying their fair share. Because right now the burden of our taxes in this state are actually on working class people. John Husted, when he was Speaker of the House 25 years ago, had this idea that if they cut the taxes for wealthy and corporations, that all of our communities would thrive and grow. Clearly that's a failed policy because I'm sitting here running for governor. I would be perfectly fine in Dayton being able to grow our communities if that policy plan worked. We've got to make sure that the burden is fairly shared in this state. And I say, look, as mayor of Dayton, I made $54,000 a year. I paid income tax, Ohio income tax on that $54,000. The lobbyist down at Broad, he pays $0 on Ohio income tax the first $250,000. I just want him to pay the same amount I've been paying. And I think that fairness issue as well will help us be able to provide services that are needed in our community.
Carol has the next question.
Hi, I'm Carol McGuire. I'm on the program committee. This is a question related to housing from Kit, I'm going to butcher this, Langsdorn, I think. What are your goals for increasing housing production in all regions of Ohio? And then I would also add to that, affordable housing or housing that's affordable is also a big issue. So perhaps combine the two of those in your response? Thank you.
Sure. Look, I'm really excited. I haven't had a chance to talk about my lieutenant governor candidate with me. Her name is Cheryl Stevens. She is the former mayor of Cleveland Heights and is on Cuyahoga County Council. I always say what's better than one former female mayor, but two former female mayors. And she also runs East Akron Neighborhood Development Corporation, which is an affordable housing entity for Akron and both Summit and Stark counties. And she's actually, her latest project is working with the LeBron James Foundation. He has his I Promise School that's a partnership with Akron Public Schools to help build affordable housing for the kids that are in those schools. Because we know what happens after school and what happens in the summers is a big issue really for our educational attainment too. We do not put enough money in affordable housing in this state, and we do not incentivize suburbs to take affordable housing. The competition for affordable housing bill has gotten to a point where you're lucky, like in the Dayton region, if we get 1 or 2 affordable housing sites that are funded. And because Columbus is having the most difficult time around affordability, it is getting the most of the tax credits. 80% of them went to the Columbus Metro, leaving the rest of the state to only have 20% to fight. And affordable housing is a problem everywhere. So really having more funding in it is key. And then secondly, I would say making sure that we incentivize suburbs to take affordable housing is really important too. We want to make sure people just don't live, particularly we know from Raj Chetty's work at Stanford that when we have folks of different incomes live across our communities, that is better for both the wealthy and the people that have less means. And so that is something the state can absolutely do in incentivizing local communities to do that. Thanks for that question. I could go on and on, like half as much as Cheryl. Cheryl would take a whole hour.
Mindy Wright, member of the program committee, and this question just comes from the audience. There are numerous bills in the State House and resolutions with the Ohio State Board of Ed that will negatively impact people of the LGBTQ+ community. How will you support this community as governor?
Well, I'm really honored to be endorsed by the Human Rights Campaign. And as mayor of Dayton, I was proud the very first year they even graded us for the Municipal Equality Index. We got over 100%. We had bonus points. And was proud as mayor that I was the first person in the state to perform the first same-sex marriage once Oberger fell. Say that 3 times, Oberger fell. And it was about an hour and 3 minutes after the suit came down. So this is, I'm proud to be called by the LGBTQ community in Dayton their strongest ally. And look, this goes back to stopping bad things from happening at the State House, right? I've always believed as mayor of Dayton that a key to growth is being an inclusive community. I've always said no matter who you love, where you come from, or what you believe, you're welcome in Dayton. It should be the same for Ohio. We have a state right now where it is still legal for a landlord to throw someone out based on their sexual orientation. It's unacceptable. We've been introducing this bill 5 times for 10 years now with no movement. As governor, I prioritize these issues. I recognize I'll have to wait until we get rid of the illegitimate state house that exists now, which will happen in the second 2 years. But until then, I'll stop those things from happening to the LGBTQ community. They're a key part of the growth of this state. And again, we are at a crossroads in decision on whether we're going to support growth or continue to have decline in the state. And the LGBTQ community support and just equality rights is key for the growth of Ohio.
If you can answer this question, what would you do about Ohio's lack of equal funding for our public school system?
Well, look, I have to say, I tell folks that the only thing the state legislature did this cycle was put forward a school funding plan that urban, rural, and suburban schools all agreed to, which is really unheard of. It's been waiting for 30 years. The challenge they did, though, is they only funded it for 2 years. They didn't fund it long-term for 6 years. And so school districts appropriately are worried what the state legislature is going to do to them. Local communities and school districts usually view whenever the state legislature is in office and convening, it's dangerous for us. And so getting that to be long-term funding for 6 years will be really key. Secondly, though, typical of the legislature, they take 1 step forward, they took 2 steps back. And then they unveiled their so-called backpack bill, which called for vouchers, universal vouchers across the state. Make no mistake, this is the privatization of public education. It is terrible for our communities. I used to tease that I thought everybody decided what community they lived in based on how much they liked the mayor. I know that is not true. It is about what school districts folks want their kids to go to. And we need to make sure that we embolden and support public education. Universal vouchers will be devastating to all Ohio communities. You only need to look at the urban communities to know what it has done to us. We should not have it. We should make sure that we're investing in public education and protecting it. Also, another key way that we support the democracy. This is a democracy issue as well.
Deb Sutherland asks, what can be done to end gerrymandering and hold the Republican members of the Redistricting Committee accountable?
Well, I think the Supreme Court should hold them in contempt of court. They're clearly in contempt of court. Secondly, like I mentioned, having a new governor that sits on the Redistricting Commission that won't put up with unfair districts will be key. So this governor's race has great implications for redistricting. And look, if we still can't get what 73% of Ohioans called for, we need to take it back to the ballot. This is the fundamental basis of what democracy is about, and we see just how out of step the state legislature is. All we're calling for is fair districts. The state, if you take all the congressional races and you put up Democrat to Republican, it's about 52% Republican, 48% Democrat, like just on generic, right? And that's like even when the districts, when we don't even barely have candidates sometimes, 52 to 48, because the decision's already made because of the lines. So you would think when we have 15 districts, we should have 8 Republican districts and 7 Democrats. Not the case now, which we have 16, which will be 12 and 4. This is clearly out of balance. And we see that both in the Senate and the House too. So we give them another chance. Hopefully we have a new governor sitting in the redistricting, which will fight doggedly for what the Ohio people have called for. They're not following the law. And so we need to get them to follow the law. And should they, then if that does not work, then we go to the ballot to change the law. Because I'm concerned right now, even if we changed it, what's going to make them follow it? That's the challenge that we have right now.
And if I could inject something there, the voters have already passed this twice.
Yes.
The Supreme Court already said it was unconstitutional. So if the Supreme Court has no enforcement power, what could the governor do?
Well, the governor sits on redistricting, so the redraw will happen, right? So that's my point. Regardless of what happens,
But
the
that's
laws.
one vote.
It is, but likely when you win the governor's seat, you do win another down ballot. So we think with that we would be able to take control of the State House. That's typically what happens.
You're very optimistic.
You have to be. We're talking about democracy. I mean, I want to move to the light.
Carol?
This is an in-room audience question. Bail reform and capital punishment are 2 pieces of legislation stalled in the State House that will significantly impact our Black and poor communities. What will you do as governor to support race and social equity in the state?
Yeah, thank you for this question. And this does, again, go back to redistricting again, right? We have to make sure that we have fair districts. The majority of folks believe that we should have a system that is not disparate to one group of people or the other, and that's what we have right now. I want to be clear, like if someone is dangerous, the judge should be able to consider that when they're making decisions about whether or not they should be in jail. And anyone that's dangerous should not be on our streets. But we are seeing particularly around low-level drug offenses that is just disparately put African Americans in jail. I think there is a path, even with this legislature, to be able to work through this problem. We need to be careful when we're doing that, because this legislature will be more concerned about cost rather than what is right. We have to make sure that we do what is right to really promote social equity.
Mindy Wright again from the program committee, this time asking a question from Tony Bell. Our state, as well as most of the country, is very divided. If you are elected as our next governor, what would you like to do to unify us?
Yeah, so I do think that the positions I talk about, and everything that we've talked about today, my position is with the majority of Ohioans. And I think that's really important for us to have a governor that governs where the majority is. This is a common sense state, and so being able to do that, I think is really, really important. I always tell folks, nobody agrees with me all the time, not even my husband. And so we need to have leaders that are willing to stand up to all sides and do what they believe is right. As mayor, there were two stories I was always taken by. Was one, a group of Republicans. Dayton is not. The city is a Democratic city. The region is one of the most conservative in the state. Worked with the entire region. And one of the Republicans called me and said, well, you know what we say about you, Nan, is, we don't like where you stand, but at least you stand. And frankly, we have a real lack of leadership in this state house and in this governor. He is weak. We need somebody that's willing to stand. And that is the reputation I've had and I will continue to have. We have to have a real leader in this governor's seat. Secondly, I always believed as mayor, and I believe this as governor, that you have to be willing to lose the job to do the job, right? That we need bold leadership. And that doesn't mean necessarily left or right. It means bold. It means standing up and both sides really hitting at you because it's not what everybody got. That's the kind of leadership I want to provide as governor. And we can have that. That's the kind of leadership Ohio likes. That's not what we have right now.
As governor, how will you create compromises with the Ohio General Assembly? What's the first phone call you would make as governor?
Well, I don't know really the first phone call I would make. I really don't think I'll have a good relationship with this illegitimate state house. I'm being honest. They shouldn't even exist right now in the manner they exist. And so I do recognize that I will have not a lot these first 2 years that we'll be able to agree on because they are not representing the people of the state. And I think it's important for us to represent the people of the state. Sometimes at the State House, I think there's an attitude, well, like we don't want to be disagreeable. Well, I'm not all for being disagreeable. I think we should be civil, but I'm not going to go along just to go along, right? And the governor position is a key point to protect people's civil rights and civil liberties. And I'm going to do everything in my power that I do to do that. And that will probably mean vetoing a lot of really terrible bills, which needs to happen at that state house. I do think there will be opportunities, particularly around public education, to be able to work together. And I do think there will be opportunities since I believe that the other communities across the state don't get as much investment, and they do have legislators in those other parts of the state that will be able to see more opportunities to really invest in economic development in places with those legislatures of those regions.
I'm told this is the last question. How can Ohio educate and become a model in the Midwest for smart and clean energy policy and alternative sources, including solar and wind power? And this is from Matthew Selva in the room.
Well, first, we have to fully repeal House Bill 6, which we talked about. And second, we have to invest in it. Right now, we're not even investing in renewable energy. We need to make sure we're doing that. We have the best workers in the world in this state. We need to be building the solar panels and wind turbines right here in Ohio. Michigan and Pennsylvania are completely eating our lunch on this. So frankly, I think our first step is just to get in the game. And then once we're in the game, we can work to make sure that we're investing in the new energy that we know is coming. This is really important, not just for being first and being in the top of it. It's also about the jobs that we will lose if we don't. We know what is coming from General Motors. We also know that along the I-75 corridor, most of the transmissions and engines are built on that corridor. Battery cars don't have transmissions and engines, and so we want to make sure we're building that through that corridor, or we're going to see the same story again about people that feel forgotten and ignored. And so this investment is really, really key for job growth across the state as well.
All right, I hope
That was
you
a
will
lightning
join
round.
me in thanking Nan Whaley for being here and answering our questions.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Colleen, for making that happen. This was always a fun discussion to hear from one of our potential candidates who could help be the leader of our state. So thank you so much for being here, Nan. Please join us next Wednesday as CMC presents another fantastic forum, The Long March for Equality, 4 generations of LGBTQ plus activists. I want to thank our CMC Political Series sponsor, Hannah News Service, our forum partners, NBC4 and King Business Interiors, our online virtual seat patrons, and to the Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation for presenting our live stream in partnership with the Columbus Dispatch and NBC4i.com. And of course, thank all of you for joining us today for another forum. Look forward to seeing you next Wednesday as the Columbus Metropolitan Club presents another community conversation. Thank you, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.